Welcome to the Rex Sanders Show. Glad to have you with us. If you are a first-time listener, a couple things we ask you to do. Number one, don't forget to subscribe. That gets you all the latest updates and info. And then number two, we're not afraid to beg around here. We'll beg for those 5 stars. If you think we're doing a great job, give us those 5 stars. It helps us with placement in the app stores. So appreciate that. Now, if you're a return listener, we want to thank you. And especially, we have a new feature. We talk about our listeners checking in from different locations. So we'd like to recognize the folks in Iowa City, Iowa, who are tuning in to listen to the program. So thank you very much. But that's not surprising because thanks to the rest of our listeners, we have listeners in 32 countries, a little over 500 cities across 6 continents. And if we could figure out how to market to penguins, we would probably have listeners in that 7th continent. But anyway, let's get on to the show. What I want you to do, if you get a chance, is to please stop by the rexandershow.com website, because when we interview our guests and tell their stories, we only scratch the surface. They are interesting people doing amazing things. And so stop by the show website, search for them. You'll get their profiles, information, links to their businesses, their social media, what have you. And so we really recommend you doing that, because we'll do our best today to tell a story. We'll do our best to share a lot, but it won't be everything. So stop by the show website. All right. As you know, listening to the show, it's a biography show. We tell people's stories, interesting people doing interesting things. Common sense abounds here in the program. And so we're excited to have this guest with us for today. So let me introduce a few things about her and tell you a little bit. She's a mother, okay, which is one of the most important roles we can have as women on the planet, fathers for men. She is a marriage therapist, but she says she's not your typical marriage therapist. So maybe the word unconventional might be the best word to explain that. She's a speaker, okay, an entrepreneur, and this is unusual and unique. She's a surrogate. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome to the program this afternoon, Corrin Voeller. Corrin, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Rex, for having me.
Glad to have you on the show today. All right. So as you know, you've listened in and dialed into a few of the shows. We always like to tell people stories, okay? So when we tell people stories, we want to go back in time because it's a contributor to who we are today. So we're going to go back to the beginning. We want to know where you were born, okay? And don't worry, you don't have to write these down because I'll ask them all. Don't forget. So where were you born? We also like to know, where were you raised? Because sometimes that's different. We had a guest on the show, Ellie Soja, who moved 63 times before she was 15. So lots of influence of moving around. People do that. We also want to know about, do you have siblings? So, and if you do have siblings, do any of them survive your harassment? Sibling influence is big when we're growing up and becoming who we are. We also want to know a little bit about your family. Okay, so your parents. Parental influence I've seen, and I'm not a therapist like you, but what I've seen in interviewing hundreds of people is this. There are generally 3 buckets. The first bucket is, wow, those super supportive launchpad parents, okay? They're the ones that were fully engaged and help you in getting on to that next step and encouraging to go tackle life. Well, then there's sort of the middle bucket. And that middle bucket is the parents who love their kids and supported them, but they were so busy eking out a living that they didn't get to spend as much time supporting their kids. And then the last bucket is what I call the stress bucket. Unfortunately, there are people who fall in this bucket where because of possible abuse or toxic situations or extreme poverty, things like that, that created an environment where the kids say, you know what, I don't want to be anything like that. Okay, so we want to talk about your parental influence, hopscotch around your education a little bit, and then talk about some pivot points, you know, the things that made you who you are today, gave you your unique perspectives, and then also too, then we'll talk about what you're up to today. And I want to dive into being a surrogate and what you do that's different as as a marriage therapist. I know you exclusively focus on marriage therapists. So anyway, so let's go back to the beginning, Corrin. Could you tell us where you were born?
Yeah, I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota,
Okay,
land
so
of the Mighty Ducks.
okay, so the land of hockey.
Yep. Yeah,
Fan,
I did never play though.
you never played. Okay, well, hockey is ubiquitous. Everybody plays up there. It seems like a lot of people playing a lot of hockey. Okay, so when you were growing up, what type of interest did you have? What did you do outside of school? So were you involved in sports or drama, theater, reading? What were some of your hobbies?
Yeah, I was definitely one of those tomboy kind of girls, big into sports and playing with the neighborhood kids. Softball was life. Somehow ended up on a really great team that we all stuck together all throughout
Nice.
childhood
Okay.
into high school.
Into high
And
school?
then, yeah, and so we did a lot of that, but I was also really into reading. Your typical millennial who is obsessed with Harry Potter, and that had a huge influence on me as a kid.
Okay, fantastic. So tell us a little bit about this, your family. Now, do you have siblings?
I do. Yeah, I have an older sister who is about 5 years older than I am, and then a younger sister who is like 16 months younger. And
Okay.
so and her and I were super close um, all all through school growing up, and we're still really close now. So she had a huge impact on how I view the world. And we kind of were always bouncing off of each other. And sometimes we have that, well, we'll talk now as an adults and say, like, how did we end up the way that we ended up when our family's so different? And I think it was just because we were our own little unit that we had with each other.
Nice. Now, tell us a little bit about your parents. What did your parents do for a living growing up? That's always a big
Yeah,
influence.
my mom had a job that she ended up working her way up through the company. So she
Okay.
literally started in the warehouse, and she's like the American dream, right? She's now at the executive level with this small to now mid-sized company. And she has been there my entire life. And so literally like the American dream, being able to work your way up through management. And then
Mm-hmm.
my dad is an entrepreneur himself. And
Okay.
so that's where I get that from. I'm not anybody who can. I tried the 9 to 5 jobs, and that for some reason just wasn't me.
Okay. So, as an entrepreneur, would you classify yourself as a risk taker, or is it just the independence that you like?
I would say it's both. It's sort of the ideas, you know what I mean? Of I'm always having those new ideas of, and then I could do this, and then I could do that. I love the freshness that comes with being an entrepreneur, like the open possibilities. I do not like um, the scheduled life and having somebody else tell you what to do. So it's both, would say, actually.
Okay. Fantastic. So, when you got finished with high school, what was your next top?
Straight to college.
Okay.
My dad is a realtor and home builder, and at one point owned an installation company. And I was the first person in my family to go to college, and he was actually not thrilled with that idea. It offered me $10,000 to not go.
What was his thoughts about not wanting you to go?
He thought that it was unnecessary and that you can make it the other way. And so he was said, $10,000, not go, and you can become a realtor and do this with me. But I had my sights set on psychology. I knew what I wanted to do always, and that school is the only way to go into psychology. And so it was one of those things. Would say that's a pivotal moment in my life, was saying no to that and kind of pushing against, because usually people's parents are pushing them to go to college, and here
Right.
mine were like, don't do that, it's unnecessary. But that's what I always wanted to do. So
So, is that what you studied in your degree, your undergraduate and stuff?
yep, psychology and communication disorders.
Okay. Yeah, because I've got a daughter who is a special ed teacher, and she has her master's in behavioral science. And so, for certain disciplines, it's really important to get that. If you're just going for a liberal arts degree, well, I could maybe understand why your dad might think that way. So interesting.
Completely.
Okay. So where'd you go to school at?
I just went to a local state college. It was only an hour and a half away. The whole thing was very daunting to try to figure out yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a safe choice. And it was nice and easy to be able to bop back and forth between home. It felt safe, but just far enough to get that, first taste of independence.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So now, once you got your undergrad, did you go to work then, or did you go into advanced degrees? What was the next stop?
Yes, I graduated what is called the worst time for someone to graduate, which was in 2010, right when the recession was full blast.
Yeah.
And so it was trying to find a job, taking one for literally minimum wage. And then eventually, so I did some like recruiting. I was an executive recruiter. LinkedIn was a huge part of my life for a short amount of time, trying to coach engineers, medical device engineers, because if you're familiar with Minnesota, we're like the medical device capital. And so I was trying to poach medical device engineers and get them to move to other jobs where there weren't a lot of jobs happening. And then did that for a few years. And then I started working at an inpatient psych hospital.
Okay.
And that was my dream to get. And I remember I applied 26 times to get that job. And I hunted down, because I had this, knowledge of how recruiting works. They would not call me back. And I ended up hunting down the recruiter, going in the back door, the back way to get to her and like contacting her, and her saying to me, she's like, "You have no hospital experience." And I said, "How am I going to get hospital experience if you won't give it to me?"
Right.
And I somehow convinced her. I said, "Just put me in front of the hiring manager. I'll get this job. I promise you."
Right.
And so I ended up doing that, which, if you think about it, inpatient psych is very intense. That's where people who are extremely depressed or suicidal or
Sure.
having manic episodes or psychosis, that's
Mm-hmm.
where everybody goes, and it's really to keep them safe. And it was a very intense job, but a very fun and rewarding job, because you were literally there trying to help people as best as you can in probably the worst parts of their lives. So that had a huge impact too.
Now, were you doing therapy then, or were you just general caretaking? What was your role when you were working at the inpatient facility?
Yeah, it's a little known role called, they're called different at all of the different ones, but the titles are either psych tech, mental health worker, or behavioral health worker.
Okay.
And so our role was to use our skills that we had. So we weren't at a master's level yet, but the skills that we did have from our psychology degrees, and try to help, make people's lives easier, doing some skills teaching, leading the groups, and also what we would call a lot of milieu management. So when the units are locked, and so people go from, you'd have, it's hard to describe now that I'm thinking about it. They would have like areas that they would go and sit in. It's like what you see in the movies, right? Obviously,
Sure.
in the movies, they make it seem much scarier, but they're sitting and watching TV or crocheting or those kinds of things. And so it's like engaging and monitoring behaviors, and then also helping when there is a crisis. So like a behavioral crisis, that what we were like really heavily trained in trying to de-escalate those situations.
Okay.
So now I have the most amazing de-escalation skills of all time, where you cannot do anything that will freak me out. I am able to stay calm in any type of situation now. So that's kind of a fun little
Probably gave you some
party.
pretty good coping skills, right? For trauma.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So how long did you stay there working in the inpatient facility?
Yeah, I did that for 3 years, and then that's when I went back to get my master's.
Okay.
And I could only do both for so long because the job was so intense. And so then I ended up trying to get more of like an office job while working on working on my master's.
Okay. So how long did it take you to finish up your master's?
The 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Did you go back to the same school or did you go to a different one?
I went to a different school called St. Mary's. They have a main campus that is outside of the Twin Cities and then a smaller campus that was mostly focused on the master's or on grad school,
Okay.
right in the Twin Cities.
All right. So you get finished with your master's. What was the next top? What was the next pivot point?
Yeah. So when you get your master's in marriage and family therapy or counseling, whatever you want, whichever one, then you have to do a year-long internship in order to graduate. And so
Sure.
a lot of people don't know about that part. So I did my internship, and then at that practice that I was working at, they offered me a job immediately after. So
Nice.
I stayed there for a little bit, and then immediately also started my own private practice. So I just really launched into that. Did both for a little bit until I had enough clients to support myself.
Support yourself.
Yep. And then I left and have been working for myself ever since.
So what's the biggest difference in running a practice? Now, I've been an entrepreneur for 35 plus years. What's the biggest, but I've never been a therapist. So what's the biggest difference between being a marriage therapist as your own versus working for another firm?
The biggest difference is not having to follow anyone's rules and being able to set it up the way that you want it to look.
Okay.
And not have to celebrate other people's birthdays. That's a really good side effect.
So no corporate cake, huh?
No corporate cake, no, practice emails, where they go out to everybody and you just have to, oh, we're changing this policy or changing that policy. I don't miss any of that.
Oh, that's nice. The non-celebrating birthdays. I love that. That's great. Because that is something about office cultures. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Not that I'm not a robot. I mean, I'm a very social person, but there's a lot of wasted time in office environments on all kinds of things that don't really matter to what you're doing. So interesting.
Completely.
Okay.
Yeah. And as a mom, that time is like golden, right? And so one of the things that I love that I get to do now is like, I see my clients and I get home. Like, I can organize it around when I need to, pick somebody up early or drop somebody off or at the end of the school day. And so it's the best of both worlds. It does get a little lonely because when you're a counselor, you're always focused on other people and they're not focused on you. And so it does get a little lonely after a while. So then it's really important to have a good, strong network of other people who have the same type of schedule as you do, that you're either meeting up or you're just checking in with them. That makes a huge difference.
So how long did it take you to get independent and be able to open up your own practice?
I think about a year.
About a year?
How long it took. So
okay.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I mean, I feel like I'm a very determined person when I decide to do something.
Okay. So I have to ask this question. After you had your practice open and you were being successful with that, did you circle back and talk to your dad again and say, hey, look what happened?
No, not quite. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
That would be nice. I feel like that would probably heal some wounds for myself to hear a good job. Very proud of you. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, but you needed that education to get the business you wanted to open. I mean, nothing against, and I've been in plenty of construction service businesses, but nothing against being an insulation crew, but that's a completely different skill set than someone who actually has to understand therapy, right?
Yeah, it was necessary, but it made it work on my own. So yeah, no, that would be great. I know that it's one of those things. I love how you described the different buckets.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really cool way to describe it. And I think that they would definitely fall into that very supportive, but also very focused on, trying to make things happen, which is its own support too.
Yeah, it is.
Parents, when our parents are working hard to make sure the classic, there's a roof over our head and there's food in our belly, that's support, but it looks a little different.
Yeah, when you're that age, and if you're under 21, you're not thinking about that support. in love. You're just thinking about, well, how much time did they spend with me and stuff. So, you know, the older my kids get, the more appreciative they are about the sacrifices that were made on their behalf, because they just don't realize, you know, when you have 5 kids, I've got 5 kids and my first grandson, you know, that's a lot of work and it's a lot of love and their things, but it may not have been as much, you know, one-on-one time. And sometimes kids just have this perception of, well, gosh, did they not really love me because they weren't? Well, no, they did love you because they were working their tails off. So
Completely. I completely agree.
well, maybe you need to go have a beer or a soda or a tea or a glass of milk or whatever you like to drink and sit down with your dad and say, I think I've been okay.
Yeah, maybe I do. That would be really nice.
Maybe that's a little therapeutic. All right. So what made you choose couples and marriage therapy?
Yeah, I chose marriage therapy by chance. I just started seeing, so I actually went into seeing postpartum and, you know, moms and things like that. I thought I would really want to focus on perinatal, which just means, you know, anything that has to, mental health that has to do with pregnancy.
Sure.
And then I was bored as hell. I don't know why, but it just didn't connect when I got all this training, specialized training, and it just didn't connect. And at one point I had taken on just a few random couples here and there. And that was what lit me up, because I can be very direct. It's a different type of counseling when, you know, when you're doing one-on-one individual, it's a lot of talking about deeply held beliefs and looking for insights. That's where the growth happens. The growth happens in the relationship with the therapist and the client. But in couples, it's completely different. The growth happens between the couple, and it's like you're assessing patterns. So I'm never sitting there judging. I'm like looking for different patterns and ways that I see that they're doing things. And then I'm helping them see that they're doing it. And then I'm looking for openings to see how we can do it differently, is basically what happens. And that to me is, for some reason, it just clicks in the brain and I love it. Like every session, even people who are, I mean, it's not my favorite thing, but even when they're screaming at each other or, you know, the very worst, I always tell other therapists when they're like, well, who should we send to you, who are great referrals? I'm like, you know, the messier, the better. Those are my favorite couples because it's so much more, there's so much information to work with and to look for big chances to help them. So that's why I ended up focusing on them, is because it just seemed to be a really good fit.
Okay. So what do you do when people are, I know you're listening, but I mean, I'm just kind of picturing this in the theater of my mind. What do you do when a couple is at each other's throats, just, you know, yelling at each other? I mean, do you have to step in and diffuse things? Do you just let it play out? I mean, what's that like to be that third wheel?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think what I do is different for each couple, which is such an annoying therapist answer. But I'll say, so when you're in the room with them is very different than when you're doing it through video, which now, since the pandemic, I've had to learn how to do it through video. It's a lot harder because you're, you know, in the room, you're present, and, you know, the quote unquote authority that you have, right? If I stop, if I say something, they will usually respond to me.
Sure.
But when you have the camera in between you guys, the screen in between you, now I've had some very interesting experiences where people are screaming, swearing, somebody gets up and leaves, the other person chases after them. In person, I would be able to open the door, you know, engage and say, you know, just let them go, or be able to do something. But now I'm just some idiot staring at an empty screen into their home, and I'm just like waiting, or, you know, going, hey, stop that, you know. So it has been a very big change since the pandemic. But, you know, in person, you realize you're in a public space. And so there have been some very interesting moments where people are really worked up and activated and they just want to scream, or they want to let the other person know. Sometimes it's reading the moment and going, you know, is this feel like it's coming from a place where they're going to run out of steam quickly, like it's like an explosion, and then they're going to calm down? Are they looking to just make the other person suffer right now?
Mm-hmm.
We're not having any of that. I mean, I've never had it where I haven't, said something and they've stopped, or we've been able to control the situation eventually. But yeah, so it's a bunch of different things.
So do you gravitate to a age of couples you like to work with? Does it matter? Is it all over the board? I mean, if you look at your portfolio of your practice, is there an age group that stands out more than others?
Yeah, definitely the middle age bracket, I would say. Middle age to even, I see some people who would probably consider themselves seniors. I would
Okay.
never call anybody that. The only ones, I have taken some couples in their 20s, but those just don't actually vibe, because really what I said, right, is like the messier the better. We're talking patterns. When you're in a messy relationship in your early 20s, it's usually like codependency, and it's not long term. That's not really a fit for the type of people that I see it, because I'm really looking to make big transformation, and that takes commitment, right? I'm committed to making this work.
Okay. So looking at your portfolio of your clients too, if they're mostly, 50s and those types of things, did they come into this with decades of dysfunction, or is it recent dysfunction? Because, I'm in that age group, and there's a lot of people who wake up who are now empty nesters, and now they certainly have time on their hands, and they're not buried in the life of a child or children, and all of a sudden they wake up and go, wait a minute, this isn't working. Or what is there any commonality from what you're seeing at that age bracket?
Yeah, it is sort of what you just described, of that relationship reckoning.
Okay.
It can happen in all different points of a relationship, but I say a lot of them have a relationship reckoning where it's like either we've gotten off track and the things that we're doing aren't actually the life we want to live,
Right.
or there's a big transition period. I see a lot of people who, are right before they're about to be empty nesters, when they start to realize, like, their kids are in somewhere in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going, if we don't get this thing figured out, we're going to be left standing there looking at each other, and we don't know who the other person is, and we don't like them. So that is usually a big piece for people to say, when the kids were younger, we accepted a lot of things that we shouldn't have, because we were just trying to get through, right? We had all of these kids, all of these things that we needed to get done each day. And there was always more time. But then as you start to see, like, hey, maybe one's out of the house and you've got one left at home, now the clock is ticking. We got to figure out what's going on between us and decide. A lot of it comes down to deciding, are we going to try to save this, or are we going to see what happens and then make a decision, or are we deciding to wait until the kids are out of the house, and then maybe we'll split at that time. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of those different things.
So when people come to you, I'm assuming that they most likely are trying to come with an agenda to save things, right? Is that a good assumption?
Well, I actually specialize in people who are considering divorce.
Okay.
And so it just happens to be like a subspecialty. And that's one of the things that I help them do, is decide what to do. And so I don't have a bias of whether or not I think a marriage should stay together. I really talk about, I am like a mirror, and I help reflect back to you what's happening so that you can make a decision. People will ask me a lot if there are people that I like, if there's ever times when I tell people you should divorce. And I've only done that literally twice, when it was like a very abusive situation.
Sure.
And, and not physical abuse, because once it's at that point, that's non-negotiable, right? But, when it was like, there are some patterns here and people aren't willing to even, look at them or accept that they're even happening. But that's extremely rare. Otherwise, um, I'm helping people make the decision for themselves. And if they ever ask, like, is this savable? My response is always the same. I'm like, I've seen people go from, divorce papers are filed, living separately. And then once they make that choice that they're going to work on it, I've seen people make huge changes as long as they decide that. And then they stay committed to making those changes. But helping them figure it out is a huge part of my job. And I do a special type of counseling called discernment counseling. So literally helping them decide. And it's just a very structured way of going through a relationship and asking different questions and taking a look at, where they're at now, what's happened along the way to get them there, and then helping each person decide what they want to do with it. And that is very, very rewarding to help people really take a look at what's going on and then making a decision. And I always lay it out as, we're not deciding right now. If you decide to stay together to work on it, you're not deciding the rest of your life. What I'm asking you to do is take divorce off the table and then see what can happen. That's a huge difference than saying, I'm going to stay with this person, right? Like, it's a lot lower stakes.
Sure.
Just a different way to ask the question. And then as we make some big changes, then, they see that, hey, things are possible. You just need a guide to be able to show you how to do it.
Okay, so a question I have for you, because again, my curious George brain goes here.
That's okay.
When you have people who come in to get the help, how do you separate yourself away from not getting involved, engaged? So I can tell you this. I've done a lot of coaching for internet marketing, okay? And it's really difficult sometimes because you're trying to get to know the client and, those types of things. And here I find myself on weekends thinking about them. I get too engaged in their lives. As a professional therapist, how do you kind of cut that cord? How do you, close up shop at the end of the day and then not think about them, till the next day or the next week or what have you?
Right. In therapy school, we have what we call, you want to detach from the outcome.
Okay.
It's a stand that you take with yourself, right? I'm detached from the outcome. I deliver you the information that I know would be helpful. I try my best to ask you questions to help you along the way, but it's all up to you at that point, right? And so that's a lot of therapy, and I didn't realize this when I was going into it. But a lot of it has to do with you, but in a different type of way. It's a lot about learning how to contain yourself and have really good self-awareness. But Rex, the thing you're talking about, I do too. I think about them all the time, but not in a way of like, I'm stressing about you. I'm wondering if you're okay. I do wonder if people are okay. It does pop into my head. I'm like, oh, I wonder what's going on in their house today, because a lot of time I'm thinking they're, I gave them something to work on, and sometimes it'll pop in. I'm like, oh, I wonder this, or if I know things are happening. But I really do work hard to always detach from the outcome. And so that's what we talk a lot about with our therapist pals, our therapist network. When we get consultation with each other, we really check in on that a lot of like, we can kind of hear it when it starts to happen for people. And you're like, some sayings are like, don't care more than your clients, because you can feel yourself doing that, right? When you see great potential, because I'm sure that's where a lot of it comes in when it comes to marketing for you, is you see the great potential and you're like, if you would just do this, right?
Right.
Like, you can't care more than they care about their own business. You have to let them take that. It's a lot like parenting in that way, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to be the person who's thinking about your clients on the weekend when you're trying to do other things, right? I mean, again, we're human. We do care if you're good at what you do. But I've just always wondered about that, because it's like, wow, let's say, for example's sake, that you had 6 clients in a day, all right? And I don't know if that's a decent number or not, but let's pretend for a moment, humor me, you had 6 clients in a day, and half of them were screaming matches. I mean, how do you go home and go, I'm done with that, right? I mean, is this part of the job?
Yeah, I think it's part of the job, but sometimes it's hard, and you have to have great coping skills and to be able to turn that kind of stuff off. But sometimes it does stick with you.
Okay.
I ride my Peloton really hard on those days. I like sometimes I'm like, put on the music and I go as hard as I can. And other times it does really stick with you. I think one of the times that it's really hard is when it's not the screaming for me, it's when people are really sad. That's when it really sticks with you. And you're like, oh, like when they're devastated. I saw somebody the other day who was just devastated. It really hit him. Let's just say it hit him really hard, and I think I helped him get there because that was part of the problem, was he wasn't quite getting the severity of what he had done and how it was relationship ending. And once he got it and he was like, oh my gosh, she might be done with me. Like his devastation, that was really hard to not take. I found myself having a harder time not thinking about it a few times throughout the day. But the thing too is, I don't know if you do this, I do this, is the information that you go out and like look for in your spare time tends to be about, little things that you've seen, right?
Sure.
Of like, oh, maybe I like marketing. I think marketing is really fun, and self-help books, and they tend to go together, don't they?
Sure, absolutely.
And so sometimes on the weekends and stuff, I'll find myself reading something for fun, but that would also probably greatly benefit a few of my clients too. So it's I always say I'm never not working, because I'm kind of always, gathering up information to be able to help people, which is what a lot of coaching is too.
So when you get to that point where sort of the couples angle of it's done, do you refer people out for additional therapy? Because, me, I'm somebody who has brain chemistry, mental health stuff over my years, and therapy is just part of my life. I mean, it's just something I do. So do you get people, is it hard to transition people? So, you can kind of finish with a couple stamp, but then they need more help. I mean, do you have somebody you work with for that?
Definitely. I have lots of different people. It's really important to have a great network of different people, because, it's not a one size fits all, and you really don't look at your client as that, right? I'm like, okay, so what would be, and it's part of the couples work too. It's like, oh, these are the things I still need to work on, or these are the things I'm interested in continuing to work on. The type of couples counseling I practice is very different, because we say we do some of that individual work in the presence of the spouse.
Okay.
Because it's important for us to have the spouse see some of that stuff that happens and make those deeper connections and have empathy for, all of the struggles. Or like the way I like to put it is, we all put up with some stuff for our partner. It's easy for us to know what we put up with, right? It's harder for us to imagine what our partner puts up with on our end. And so it's really good to get some of that. But having lots of different people to be able to refer to, so that people are getting the right fit. Because as you know, if you've done tons of therapy, or even just a little bit, it's so important to click with the therapist.
Yes.
That's half of it, isn't it? Right? Like the person you just are vibing with, and they get you, and you don't feel judged. And so sometimes it's all about just like, getting to know people's personalities, and then being like, oh yeah, they would totally get it. I have a really good therapist friend who, her specialty is very unique. She works with nerds, and so you got somebody who's nerdy, because then, she gets all of the references that I wouldn't understand. You're talking about Doctor Who, or, these different things. She's going to be right there with you. You don't have to then on top of it, describe what it is that you're trying to mean.
That's an interesting niche to market to. I work with the nerds.
Yes. And you would think, like, that's a huge market, isn't it? Right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Nerd isn't a bad thing. A nerd is a great thing. I'm a Harry Potter nerd. There's Marvel nerds. There's nerds. Like,
yeah,
there's all sorts of them.
So what's next on the horizon for you? What's your next BHAG that you're after?
That is going to be helping couples online and really trying to get like the therapy concepts, but without it being therapy, into courses online. I get lots of requests from people all across the country, but the way that therapist license works is that we can only work with people in our state.
Sure.
So it's really unfortunate because then, yeah, I mean, you can see. So that's my newest thing that I'm starting to put together, is different ways to be able to help people online.
That's fantastic. Like you mentioned before, it's a different dynamic though, because it's very stale. If you don't have someone in front of them, I was in most of my career in tech before I started doing some of these things. I was in sales. And being in front of somebody is completely different than being on a phone call or on a Zoom meeting, because you can see their body language. You can see the things, that their artifacts and things in their office. You can see how they respond to, because when we're talking here today, it's a headshot, right? We don't see what the hands are doing, the fidgeting, or we don't see that I might have a nervous foot or something, kinds of things there. So it's always from an observation perspective, different. You can't. And then there's just a karma vibe you can pick up when you're in person that you can't do when we're looking at glass and talking through a camera. Yeah. So
yeah, that's the energy between the two of you, right? You can respond to that. And, sometimes it's in that safety thing. And so that's part of it, is that not everybody has the ability to get therapy, to get the help that they would really benefit from. And that's usually in person. And so a lot of this happened because during the pandemic, I started making TikTok videos on therapy. And the amount of people who just are like, oh, what about this? And I need more information on that. And, so it was kind of like, it really starts to just get in front of you, and those ideas, right? Of like, oh man, like there's just so many people who would really benefit from, learning ways to improve their communication. Is that going to completely transform their relationship, what they could get through doing intense couples counseling? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm going to detach myself from the outcome and just try to help in the way that I can.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the whole empathetic and validation cycles that people learn. Once you learn how to communicate like that, it's much different than the attack and defend type environments and those types of things. And so, but again, much easier to do that in person than it is online. Well, that's a great challenge that you have coming up. But I think what's interesting is the pandemic has forced so many industries to look at delivering content differently, services and content differently. Myself, I've been in tech for 34 plus years. Well, heck, we've been doing online and working remote for 25 plus years. This was nothing, no big deal. But for a lot of industries, like therapy and all kinds of things, it was a new frontier to face, and then to plow through some of those and then deal with some of the dynamics. What was the biggest thing that you adjusted to?
Being on camera. That for me was hard. I used to, people would make requests for, and this is, oh, sorry, I didn't finish my sentence. People would make requests for video therapy before pandemic started. And I would always be like, oh, here's a referral to somebody who does that. Just that seeing yourself, something happens to people, right? Like it's terrifying, and it doesn't make any sense because people see you every single day.
Yeah.
Right. Like I see people all day long. So what difference does it make that they're seeing me through the computer, or if I'm seeing them in person? It doesn't compute, right? But that for me was a really hard thing to get over. And now it's fine, but it took a while.
Sure.
So,
absolutely.
And therapists, I kept hearing this, is like, we're sort of anti-technology. We're always like, we're very skittish about these types of things. Right. And we're like, lots of questions. What does that mean? And so, we hadn't done a good job of embracing things that could really help us up until this point. And it really forced us to have to, and just be like, there are things out there. There's been great new developments, and instead of being scared and saying no thanks, or you just shouldn't do that, getting to know these types of things and really meeting people where they're at, which is so many people are on their computers now or on their phones.
Oh, yeah.
And just meeting them there. I talked to one therapist she's been doing it for like 30, 40 years. And she said, I remember when fax machines came out and everybody was saying, oh, you can't use fax machines for, sending records to each other. And she's like, we even resisted the fax machine. So it's just, it's in the therapy culture, but I think we're there now to start, meeting people, at your job. You can do your lunch break, do your therapy, and then get back to working that day. I think it's pretty cool that we've made that transition.
That's fantastic. Well, I have one more question for you that I ask all my guests, and this is a little bit of out of left field here. So in the Western cultures, we have this thing called a bucket list, okay? And I've actually interviewed the bucket list guy. His name is Trav Bell. He's from Melbourne, Australia. Episode number 60, if you want to listen to an hilarious episode, listen to that one. Anyway, everybody has a bucket list, things we want to do before our time is done on Earth, right? But then there's an opposite to everything, all right? So there's another list that's the opposite of the things you want to do, the things you have no interest in doing or not going to do again, okay? Now that list rhymes with a bucket, but starts with an F, okay? But this is a family show, so we're not going to say the F it list, okay? But you know where I'm going. So I want to know, I'm going to give you a minute to think about this, Corrin, is what might be an item or two that's on your F it list? Now, I'll give you some examples. Like for me, I'm not going to have pet snakes. Not going to happen, okay?
Oh.
I'm not going to be eating any more sardines and caviar. Nope, not on my list. And then this one was really difficult, and I did an episode on this one too, is I won't ever again, ever do a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. The concept of excessive heat, excessive humidity, excessive drumming and chanting, and a slice of nudity, no, not going to do it, okay? So what might be an item or two that would be on your F it list?
Oh my gosh, I love that question. That's hilarious. And I love the name. That's amazing. For me, anything that requires being up high, like skydiving, and those are the things that end up on people's bucket lists. And for me, it's like, absolutely not. I'm taking no part in anything like that. Yeah. And, we didn't really touch on this, but I've been a surrogate 3 times.
Oh, okay. We can go back to that for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what that means is, so I had my 2 kids for my family. And then as a gestational surrogate, I carried other people's children.
Sure.
So they're not genetically related to me. I had 2 girls for one family and a boy for another family. And after every single one of them, I always say, I'm never doing that again, right? It's the labor, it's the delivery. But then I always end up doing it again because I want to help people so much. So that popped in as soon as you described it. I'm like, oh my gosh, my husband would say, remember, you say you're not doing it again right after, right? When you're in pain. And he would love it if I could remember that it was on the F it list and not go back and sign up for another.
Well, as the father of 5, I might have to mention to you that you must like being pregnant, because that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I love being pregnant. And I know, sometimes that can be triggering for some people to hear because they had a really bad experience. And so that's when I say I loved it. That is not me ever saying that other people didn't love it or that there's something wrong with anybody for not. Everybody has different experiences. And for some reason, they always go really well for me. And, and that's nothing I'm doing on my end. It just does. And I would say it's like a fun little side hobby that I have. And it can be. And it's the greatest to be able, as a woman, to be able to let your stomach stick out and people are like, oh, that's cute. When usually you're trying to suck it in all the time, right? So for 9 months, I get to just let it be and not have to worry about it.
Well, you must have a giant heart to be able to carry babies for other people. That's amazing. I've not met a surrogate before. So that's probably another whole show in itself. So we'll probably have to have you come back on there. So I also want to check back in with you year or so down the road, see where you are with your programs on your your webinar type things or your online courses, because that's a big trend, big trend. We've all learned to do things on demand these days. I can't even tell you when the last time I've watched anything live, and that would only be a football game. Other than that, I just don't watch anything live. So we've become an on-demand world, that's for sure.
For sure. Yeah, it's kind of, it has its pros and cons, right? Like,
yeah, that's for sure.
So,
well, thank you for coming on. It's been wonderful to get to know you, learn your story. Give out your website or your social media for us.
Yes, thanks. You can find me at Corrin Voeller on Instagram, and then it's Corrin the Counselor on TikTok. Those are probably the two easiest places to find me.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. It's been great to meet you this afternoon, and I appreciate you sharing your story. And maybe we'll just have to send your husband an email about that surrogate thing being on your effort list, right?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, please don't. But it was good to meet you too. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I just tell you this, the next time someone talks about a bucket list, you're going to remember this conversation. So
I won't forget it.
That's for sure. All right, folks, we're going to call that a wrap for this show. Please don't forget to stop by and visit Corrin on her social media sites, and then also to stop by the show website and get her information. So until next time, we will say what we say at every single episode. Be safe, but be bold, and make it a great day.